Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to the keepers and players of Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips and how you can apply them to your table. In this episode, we're discussing tips on how to be a good player, as well as discussing problem players.
This is something a fan had asked for, isn't it?
Yeah, I had a fan reach out to me and brought up there are so many different videos and blogs and podcasts that talk about how to be a good game master and all the tricks to being a good game master, but they wanted something to actually help them as a player, because we have brought up, like, we've talked about like bad things players do, but other than don't do that, what are things that would make you a good player? So figured, that's actually a good point. Nobody ever talks about that. So let's do it.
I like it. I like it. Tips for everybody.
Now, one of the big ones that I always do say is the there is a little bit of pre-work that very often you find yourself needing to do, especially if you're doing a longer campaign. If you're doing a one shot, probably not, but where at the end of your adventure, you complete your dungeon or your investigation or whatever it is, and your character advances a level. And if you've got a game where you've got some special ability, or maybe your spellcaster gets new spells, or maybe you just want to, you got some money and you would like to buy some equipment for your character, a new weapon or cybernetic enhancement, whatever. Try to get that stuff, like, give it some thought, give it some planning of what it is you want to do and how you're going to upgrade your character and all of that before you show up to the next game, because everybody shows up to the next game, we're ready to play, and that's when Ricky opens up their book, flips to the ranger or whatever, and says, like, well, I need to choose what my new special ability is, and then they spend 20 minutes going through the book while everybody else was sitting there ready to play. So one of the big things that I would recommend to be that player that the GM just absolutely loves is to be the one that shows up with all of that stuff already planned. So they sit down and say, "Hey, I'd like to get this special ability. I'd like to start using this spell, and hey, this game, since we get all that money, I would like to buy one of these items." And then we can just hit the ground running. The GM can go, "Okay, yes," or figure it out, and we're not really spending the first half of the new game doing all the paperwork that we could have done in our own time between them, especially if it's very clear that that player has not given it one moment's thought since the last game ended, because now they're taking time away from everybody else in the room. And it's especially bad if you've only got like one or two players' handbooks and you've got three or four players. And now once somebody gets done taking all their time, they then pass the book to the next guy who then needs to take their time coming up with it. And those are the times as a GM I have just wanted to bang my head on the table, because our window of playtime has just been killed. So any prep work that a player can do, I'd recommend figure that out. And if sometimes if you're not sure, sometimes it's nothing wrong with asking GM, like, "Hey, before the game, is there anything we should do?"
Right. And, there are new players who are joining games all the time. And those, new players, they may not be fully versed or have they don't have the experience to realize that there's something that we could be doing in between games. Uh, Game masters help these, especially with the new players, help them out and just say, hey, listen, before we get together for the next session, do you have time on this evening or something? I just wanted to talk to you real quick so we can help you prepare for your next character. These little private sessions, they can be a great time to go over some of the little rule nuances, maybe things that are specific for your character class or different equipment that you're going, that you have and can use. there can even be some interesting players and game masters can use this opportunity to maybe say, hey, by the way, when you were picking up your supplies, you found a map. There's a scroll, there's a scroll case, there's a map in there. Bring that up when we get together. Show the guys at the table this thing that you found. So you can kind of plant seeds like that and get these characters keyed up and queued up so that you're ready to jump in right when the next session starts.
Oh yeah, well, because everybody shows up willing to wanting to play, and it's best if everybody's capable of playing versus we're now going through the process of buying equipment or choosing which equipment to buy. That's actually the I don't mind going through it buying equipment. I really dislike the choosing portion because if they come to me with a shopping list, we can just go through it and then get on with it. But if it's they haven't even put together a wish list. Um, so I would suggest that reach out to your game master. Of course, yes, game masters you should try to prompt them with that. But even if the GM doesn't prompt them, I believe a good player will think of doing that. That they wouldn't even require their GM prompting them. They might even prompt their GM saying, "Hey, is there anything we need to do?"
Yep, absolutely. I was going to say another thing people should be considerate of is as you're playing and you're getting into that story, you're immersing yourself into this world. um Remember that there are more than there's more than just you at the table, and that other players are going to be looking for some of that limelight. They
Oh
want to be
God,
able
yeah.
to have their opportunity in the sun, to have their character shine.
Oh no, the kind of the main character syndrome. Because we have our character, we want our character to do all sorts of cool and awesome things or whatever their personal story is. But yeah, the GM they're balancing this between three or four or five or however many players, and a lot of times you will have that one player who really kind of forgets that there's other people in the room, and even if they are doing a great job with everything else, if they're not letting the other players play, that is a bummer, and that becomes a drag. So be aware of the other players, and I'll even go one step further. Is if you're at a table and you do have a player that's hogging the spotlight, and you're just one of the players there, there's nothing wrong with even saying like, "Hey, let's see what Kevin's doing." uh, which is you can help steer the players that are hogging the spotlight into sharing it, even if it's not just for you. But sometimes you will have that quieter player. Maybe they're new, maybe they're just personalities. They're not very assertive and they're very quiet, and they're the ones that usually get talked over the most. Is if you then have this kind of domineering, very loud, sort of player who just talks over them, then sometimes it's good to have that other player to be like, hey, let's see what so and so is doing, or let so and so talk. And that to me is actually much more effective than if the GM does it. If another player tells a loud player to maybe share the stage, players seem to be more receptive because they're a
Oh
peer.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the whole, mentorship and modeling of behavior kind of thing. If an experienced player, um, if as you're playing and the story's unfolding, and uh, you know, maybe your character is a heavy, all muscle, no brains. Um, but as a player, you realize you need to get to the library and do some research, right? So you might be able to as a player go, hey, listen, Bob, let's get how about you and we go to the library, and I'll be there to just kind of get you coffee and run any errands that you need while you're completely immersed in doing all this research stuff, right? Because Bob hasn't been speaking up. Bob didn't bring that idea up. Bring that idea up. Kind of mentor and bring Bob to the table and say, hey, yeah, why don't you have your character do all this research stuff? I'll go with you just to be your helping hand, your sous chef, if you will, for research.
Yeah. Having a player kind of serve as that mentor or that guardian for either the new player or the kind of quieter one is really, really, really valuable. And yeah, I'll also kind of step that one a little bit further. Um, if you do have a player who, if there's chit chat, my group, we love to chit chat. That to sometimes to our detriment, and yeah, there comes a point where we finished a break or we're kind of at a lull and we kind of get to chit chatting, and I'm as the GM kind of like kind of tap on the table, go, come on guys, let's get back to the game, and we wrap up whatever we're talking about and get back to the game. You may have noticed that I am rather chatty, so my
No.
wife also has the additional benefit of the look, because I, as the GM, very often need somebody to look at me for a change and be all like, "Hey, Seth, are you going to get back to running this game now?" I'm like, "Oh, crap." Uh, Even if so, with a player, sometimes it's good to help keep that game focused, even the GM, because some of us are dumbasses. Sometimes we need to have so you wanted to run this game, right? Or were you just going to tell us about that TV show? So,
Nice. Nice. And, I meant to ask, since you do play, in-person games much more often than I do. Um, do you allow, or is it common? Not that it's allowed, but is it common for your players to have their cell phone on the table, or what about players who might be on call, right? They're
oh,
working IT and they're on call. Does any of that kind of stuff come up in your table?
well, it's I'm also in the unique situation that some of my players I've played with so long, it's gone from like before any of us had cell phones to the present day. Uh, uh, so there's been that whole rush. And yeah, I remember even like when the smartphone came out, it was like suddenly like the GM's worst nightmare of like, guys, get the hell off the internet. But I've heard a lot of GMs that have like, no phones. No, my players can have their phones because they sometimes they might be on call. They've got wives and kids and businesses and stuff that might need to call them. I've had a player like have to leave in the middle of the game for a pipe burst at home, and their wife called them frantically. Their daughter's car got hit while it was in a parking lot, like totaled. And he had to go help deal with that. Yeah, I've had medical emergencies with family happen. So I'm not going to tell them that no, you can't have your phone, because what if they miss that call? That's far more important. So um, I let them have it, but I also have you need to have a reason to be touching it. If if and this is also another one where I've had players police each other with like when we bring in somebody new, that if you're on your phone, you need to have a reason to be on it. And so usually what I'll do is like, hey, is something wrong? Is actually how I say it, instead of being like, don't be on your phone, or what are you doing on your phone? Like, is something wrong? Because sometimes the answer has been yes. But if a player is just sitting there on their phone, even if they're listening, quote unquote, because they think they can listen while they're scrolling Facebook or whatever it is, they are very often missing a lot of details. And as me as a GM, I'm like, well, I'm losing them, and because you are, but they're not allowed to just play on them because we're here to play. And having a player that's on their phone, 100% of the time, in my experience, they are less engaged while they're on the phone than as if they just put their phone down. So I do allow it, but they're not allowed to play with it. But I want them to have it in case they need it. Same thing's gone for like I've had players that would do like crafts. Like I'd have a player who did chainmail, and I've had players who were leather workers and stuff like that. And they're like, "Hey, can I work on this thing while I play?" Like, okay, yeah, like I understand. I have ADD. I always have to be doing something with my hands, so that's cool. But I've also had it where then like the player like took up half the table with whatever the hell it was they were working on. It's like, okay, like tone that down. So uh, a good player will kind of be responsible with their distractions. Kind of to put down the urge to pick their phone up and start scrolling online or looking for something else. If I'm going to trust you to have it because we're all adults, I trust a good player isn't going to start surfing the net, because if even if you think you're slyly doing it under the table and nobody notices, the bad news is, yeah, they notice because we're all just sitting here looking at each other. Or if you are going to have some sort of little side thing that you're doing, little craft or whatnot, as long as it's kind of small and not distracting, especially the other people in the room, if you're suddenly encroaching on their physical space with whatever it is you're doing. So I don't mind that stuff, but I don't want it to become distracting. And I expect my players to keep that in mind, that it's not hurting their attention or anyone else's attention.
So chainsaw sculpting is going to be out.
No, I don't think that would be a really good one there.
Awesome. Well, so all right, this is going to kind of change horses a little bit, but getting back to players and their characters, um, another tip I would have is players should really know your character. Know what skills they're good at. Have a drive. What motivates your character. If it's a class based system, have an understanding of what abilities your class has at your current level. Um, do you have a spell list? Right? What spells do you have ready? Are you playing where you need to be concerned about components? Um, are you playing a game where you're uh, tracking your encumbrance? I mean, so there's so much nuance that's available in all these games. Find out and really kind of hone in on that level of detail that's going to be used at your table, and be invested. The other players will appreciate it, your game master will appreciate it. Be invested in the game, be invested in your character, and know that character, know the ins and outs of that character, and not just what your current character is, but have a drive, have a goal. Try and see if there's a future that you want to achieve with that character, and what can you do to get to that future. Is it the next level, or is it acquiring a certain artifact? What is the future of your character, and what can you do to help ensure that?
Oh, amen. Uh, yeah, from just even from a purely mechanics point, yeah, there's the basic one of your character has the ability to 3 times a day do a ultra power strike that does whatever whatever. No one else has this because no one else is your class, or even if they are your class, they didn't choose that ability. Whatever it is, you're the only one that can do it. Well, I expect you to remember that you can do it, uh, or what it does, because no one else in the room uh, it needs to remember that. It's good if they do. It's cool if everybody can remember what each other's stuff are and we can remind each other. But I expect the person that has that power ability to know it. And yeah, of course, yes, new players might not know all the game yet, etc. So there is that learning curve, and I'm very forgiving of that. But I've also had players where we've played a character for a good while, and they still can't remember how many attacks they get per round or how much damage their ability does, and we have to revisit that every single game. Or sometimes they have to be reminded. To the point, I think that they have literally cataloged that in their head as I don't need to remember this. Everyone else will remember it for me. Kind of like how I am with phone numbers. Now that my phone remembers them all for me. Uh, so yeah, learn your character skills and powers, but also looking forward, there are a lot of abilities that might have prerequisites where, like, if you want your character to be the really cool I fight with two sword dancer person, to get the I fight with two sword dancer ability, you first have to get the two weapon fighting, and then you first have to get before that the weapon master, or whatever it is. And those are often chains that you need to start pretty early on. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
so
The I know the Star Wars, the current Star Wars game. It has every class has this like very diverse tech tree kind of
mhm.
uh, growth that you can go through, so that even if you had two characters who were smugglers, um, there's so many different nuances of smugglers with the different tech trees. You could both be smugglers, but then you're just going through these different trees,
Oh yeah, you're
and unlocking all these different abilities. The players really need to stay on top of that, because your game master is doing so much else. That is squarely in the players ballpark. This is what they need to be controlling and keeping track of.
Oh, and especially when you do have cases where you might have been playing a game like that for a while. Some of like the Modifius Conan is like that. The Star Wars though has got an elaborate skill tree. It's really cool. But uh, if you're the type of player that like, oh, I get a new special ability, I'll just go through them right now and I'll choose this one that looks fun. And you never have that forward sight of ultimately what do I want this person to be. uh, After several advancements, that's when that player kind of looks over, and all the other players have got some sort of really cool ability because they have built it along this ladder, and now they're doing something amazing. But you never had that foresight, that you just kind of grabbed a bunch of the little low hanging fruit of whatever struck your fancy that exact moment. And it's only kind of disappointing, like, oh, well, they can do these things just so cool and I can do a couple things pretty neat. And so there's that building and planning. Also share that with your GM, because if that is something that you're working toward, the GM can make that really cool when you get it, because then they can throw in tailored encounters or events or items. And it's also extremely frustrating if you do, as a GM, throw in a tailored event, encounter, or item, and to deal with a character's special ability or spell, and the player forgets that they have that special ability or spell. So all of a sudden, this opponent that could have been easily bested had they just bothered to remember they have this special ability that they chose themselves, is now this formidable problem. And the whole time the GM's got to sitting there like, well, I'm waiting for them to do their power ultra strike. That's all they have to do. This is their time to shine, and they don't. And then after it's over, I've actually had this happen a couple times. That same player then goes like, "That was too hard." That's usually when I flip out. Look at your character sheet, and so definitely remember, because if your game master is going to try to tailor it for you, and they're remembering you have it, well, it would be really unfortunate if you choose that moment not to remember.
Yep. If you had just taken the sunstone out of your pocket, you could have defeated them.
Another one on that, and I did not know this was one that you needed to tell people. It's one of those. It's become such second nature. I kind of forgot that there was a period I didn't know this. Is especially in Call of Cthulhu or investigative games, is to take notes. Um, when I did a recent game, well, recent like it was last year, but with Glass Cannon, we did a Call of Cthulhu recording, and when people watch the video, a lot of them comment of like, "What are you doing? Why do you keep looking down?" It took me a second to realize, like, oh, because I'm writing notes. And so I'd interacted with some of the commenters on that, like, oh, well, no one ever told me I needed to. And it's like, there's like so many NPCs. There's so much information. Like, I have to take notes. That way I can remember, like, so what was the sheriff's name? What was this? Because that's how you get a lot of that information of like, oh, hey, these two people have the same last name, or uh, we know the event happened at noon, and this person said that they were doing something at noon. That then rules them out as a suspect. So you just have to keep track of it, especially if an adventure, it might take multiple sessions, and we've all slept since the last time we met. So
Right.
you know, so take notes of what the GM's giving to you, and it's amazing how a lot less lost you suddenly feel. Um, you're kind of like the genius that you remembered that. So I'm just so used to making notes when I game. It had never occurred to me that people hadn't considered that. So
Yeah.
I think when
I
they're
think
looking
it's
at online games, they see people typing, but since I'm so old school, I've got like a notepad.
right.
They're like,
Right. Well, yeah, because it's funny that you bring it up because of your glass cannon experience. You're in that particular experience, you're playing in a game that's being video recorded. And so people are kind of, maybe unconsciously, maybe for some of them very consciously, especially if you're like producing the show, but they're expecting the players to be face up, you know, so that you're presenting yourself to the camera so that it can be, part of the show, right? Your facial expressions are part of the show. But for an old school grognard who's taking handwritten notes, you look down, and you're staring at your navel to take notes instead of maybe typing on a Word doc, which, in that case,
you're
your
still
face
facing the
up,
camera. Yeah.
your face up, you're at the camera, and you're just typing away. But that is kind of funny that particular old school skill um, got kind of noticed and called out in that scenario.
Yeah. And so good player should take notes, even if it's just you meet the innkeeper and his name is Reggie. Write that down, because also it's really handy later on when you go to the inn. You can be like, "Hey, is Reggie here?" And the GM can be like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I named him." Because sometimes it is very important for a larger plot. Other times it's really good to help kind of the whole group remember what the fiction is of, well, there's an inn and it's run by a guy named Reggie. And it
Yes.
kind of keeps that consistency. But yeah, but part of it's also, there's a little bit of metagaming, which I know is a dirty word, but there is the metagaming aspect of, we all came here to play this game, whether we're librarians turned investigators, or epic heroes, or whatever it is. uh, we showed up to play, and you kind of need to be aware that this is a game that we're trying to do. So make your character be the type that would do the adventure. If you're doing
Yep.
if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, you're usually playing like a normal guy, right? You're a taxi driver, or you're a librarian, or a school professor, whatever it is. And you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you need to crawl through a muddy hole in a cemetery. Well, most people would not do that. They would nope out. But you're a player character. You need to have a player character that would go into the muddy hole in the cemetery to see what the hell is down there. And it is that kind of real, like that acknowledgement that this is the adventure. Because I've had players who were so strictly like, this is what my character would do. and they're not doing it in that weird malicious way where they're trying to justify being like a jerk uh, to like the other characters or anything, but they're really wanting the GM to give them a very undeniable personal reason why they have to go. And at the end of the day, the ultimate reason to go in there is that's why we're here.
Right. Exactly.
And
I
like,
love
and the
how
GM should give a reason, but
yes.
that is, like, well, you want to go in there because you're missing your friend Carl, and Carl's footprints go up to the muddy hole. Yeah, I'm not going in there. I'm gonna call somebody like, why are you here?
Right. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I love how the gumshoe system addresses that up front because your character sheet, your character has a stat called drive. And the question is, what is it that drives your character to explore strange mysteries? Why do you go into the darkness when other people don't? Why do you opt to check this mystery out yourself instead of passing it off to the authorities? What pushes you to do these crazy things? It's your drive. And they even have a mechanic so that if a player's character is going against their drive, which you have agency, you can go against your drive, but you created this character and you stated and accepted that this is the drive that pushes your character forward. If you choose to go against your drive, there is like a mechanical penalty for that, of which I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I think it has something to do with sanity or stability in that game, but yeah, you have a drive. If you're playing D&D, why would you create a character who's I'm a grizzled veteran who's retired from adventuring.
yeah,
So we want to go on adventures. Do you want to go on the adventure or stay at home and raise cats? So you gotta make a character that's gonna want to
gonna
be there.
gonna go in the dungeon. And
Go.
they say, yeah, GM should be coming up with a reason to send you there, but uh, ultimately, we all know that we're here because we want to play a game where you're the type of person that crawls into the muddy hole and finds the monster or the treasure or whatever it is. So there is that metagaming. You have to acknowledge that we're playing a game, and that's why we came here. And then other aspects to that is that acknowledgement that we're playing a game, and sometimes you can hand that spotlight over. One of the things my players will very often do is uh, you can have the character that's got the really good library use. Look up and be like, "Hey, I've already made my library use for the night. Does anybody else want to try this?" And kind of like, does anybody else want to roll? Because I could, but you're not going to get better at library use if you don't roll. And at pass along, which yes, it is the metagaming of I've already got my check mark. So when we get to the end of the game, I get to roll to see if I get better at this. So if I succeed at this, it's not going to help me anymore. Would anybody else like a check mark? Which is total metagaming. I absolutely fully support them doing it because it also helps get other people involved in the game. Which kind of like what I was talking about with coaching earlier is I want a good player should be looking out for everyone else's fun, the other players or the GM, and kind of considering like, hey, is everybody else involved and everybody else having a good time, and try to prompt situations that can help them have fun. Because usually, we come in, we're like, kind of like, I'm going to have a great time, and a lot of times when you do have a problem player in a group, it comes down to they're the one that they're there to have a great time, even if it's at the expense of everyone else's good time. And a
Mm.
good player to me is one that it's kind of help looking out for everybody. and the will occasionally kind of look up from their character sheet and look around and say, "Hey, let's let's give so and so a chance to roll. Give so and so that little bit of a spotlight." And even if you look at it from a narrative point of view, of like, why would your character who's really good at library search look at the other guy and be like, "Hey, do you want to look up dinosaurs today?" When, but they're doing it for the metagame aspect of we're playing a game, and I really want Ricky to roll. And so there is that aspect of helping and acknowledging that this is a game and this is our fun time. This is what we spend a lot of money and time doing. So
Yep, exactly. You know, as we've been talking, it's you know, the investment in your character, uh, knowing your character's abilities, and just kind of trying to see their future and continue with it. Don't forget though that in these games, part of the fun and excitement, and it's more often than not a part of it in like Call of Cthulhu, which is quite lethal, is that character death can happen.
oh yeah.
You know, these games are not contests. They're not, you know, they're not board games that have a defined winner or a defined ending. This is an ongoing, breathing, living experience. You know, your characters can grow and your characters can die. And if that should happen, you know, it's okay. Just go with it and realize this is part of the fun. And a memorable death can be something that becomes something, an epic story that is a shared experience with you and your players, and that can be recounted and remembered for decades.
Oh, definitely. We've got an entire arsenal of wonderful stories that end with somebody dying or involve someone's character dying. But it's also one of the things which they've kind of brought up, like with old D&D, way back in the 70s and early 80s. There was a lot more risk to character. Like it was considered like if your character died, that was just part of the game. Um, the one of the channels, Dungeon Craft, Professor Dungeon Master actually brought up the art from first edition versus fifth edition, showing how in first edition D&D, a lot of the pictures of the monsters, they were the characters were in peril. Like, they were impaled with a piercer. There were rat grubs digging into their arm. And then he would show the pictures from fifth edition. It was usually like the character being like awesome and mighty and flying through the air and kicking the crap out of something. When before, a lot of the pictures of monsters was it hunkered above a dead character and eating them. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
so the the idea that your character is in peril and can die, that actually does kind of add to the fun, is if you survive. And don't don't think of it as you have to beat your GM. And there's so many pieces of advice given to GMs going like, hey, you're not here to like murder your characters, you're here to challenge them, you're here to uh, give them risk, but give them a good time. That players also need to acknowledge that we're under risk. I will trust my game master is not um, throwing me in an impossible situation that I have no chance of living because they want to uh, somehow dominate me by killing my character. But also, you can die, and that's okay. And if the GM is throwing a big threat at you, also acknowledge that the GM is, should be giving a way that you can escape it as well. There are options to
Yep.
do it. And it might not be all of you, but it is not impossible. Uh, and there does have to be that bit of trust between the player and the GM. And I have had players who they were dear close friends of mine, and but whenever we gamed, they suddenly thought that I was the boogeyman out to get them. And so if we're playing a game and I have the monster attack one of the characters, And, sometimes I roll a dice or I just go by where they were in marching order or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, it's going to be, it's going to be Steve. And, and when if it was Steve, he's like, well, why is he attacking me? It was like this personal attack. It's like, well, I mean, I've done this for everybody at some point, but whenever it was him, he was very, uh, he was very vocally suspicious that I was intentionally trying to go for him, and it caused a lot of discomfort. Even if it was like, "Why is it giving?" Is like, "Well, because you're the one that walked in the room where the slime monster was. That's why it's you." And
Do you remember me asking for the marching order?
oh yeah, or like it's like, "Well, I'm going to be checking for traps." Like, okay, then I assume you're in the front because you're the one checking for traps. And then the monster attacks the first one. And he was like, well, why am I the first one in the party? He's like, well, because you said you were the one checking for traps. Like that's that's literally one of the arguments that we got into. So, but so trust your game master is wanting to challenge you because part of why we do this is the challenge and overcoming the whatever obstacles we have. But trust that they're not just trying to murder you.
Right. Exactly.
I always kind of explain it like a teacher. Like the teacher wants to challenge you. That's quite literally why they're there. Uh,
Yeah.
they don't they don't want to fail you. I mean, if they don't like you, they want to fail you. Why would they want to keep you for another year? But um, it's like
Exactly.
so you have to kind of learn that. And GMs get tons of advice to learn that because that is something that a lot of GMs have to be taught. But at the same time, I don't think enough people do tell players that exact same advice of you're all working together because once again, we're all here to have fun.
Yeah. And for me, part of that trust is trust that the GM is putting the clues and the path of that adventure and its options, because it's hopefully never just a single path. Hopefully you have options, but the available options are being put before you. It shouldn't nor I don't want to make it an all or nothing, because I'm sure that this exists in some cases, but for the most part the options are before you. Players shouldn't have to go out of their way to think of something completely opposite, a 180 from what is being presented. Have faith in the GM that you will get more of the adventure if you lean in and just kind of help tell the story with them.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you're talking about here. Where uh, the one of the examples I always like to talk about is like if we're playing old D&D or something, and the GMs also knows that the next adventure we're going to do is Ravenloft. About Ravenloft, to get all this stuff. It's going to be so cool. Uh, when that adventure hook drops, don't decide that you want to not follow the lead because it's a trap or something. It's like, no, you're going to have a lot more fun if you go the direction the GM is trying to
Go
encourage.
into the misty woods,
Yeah,
follow the mist.
go into the misty woods, damn it. And it's part of that also comes down to making a character that would do the adventure. And one of the deals that I've made with my players is I will give you a reason to go on the adventure, and if that's not good enough, I need you to help me come up with a reason for you to go on the adventure. Uh, because that once we're going to metagame, we all want to play this adventure. The adventure is going to be Ravenloft. What will convince your character to go into the Misty Woods? Don't make me keep guessing because I clearly didn't know. I missed on the first shot. And that way we can all lean into it. Because if a player says, well, I'd really want to have something to do with my sister, great. We'll figure that out. And we will both together come up with the reason to do it. Uh, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. And if we do have an entire session where we're trying to talk Ricky into going into the Misty Woods and our 3-hour session is done and we got nothing done, no one's happy, and no one was happy with that adventure. Uh, so you want to, yeah, trust your game master. If they are clearly leading you, and maybe they're not too subtle about like, hey, let's go this way, and doesn't this sound great? You should probably go that way because probably it'll be a lot cooler if you do, because that's what they're planning. Uh,
Absolutely.
and hopefully your game master will get a little better at subtlety, and hopefully your game master will get a little bit better at uh, giving you hooks, and hopefully all that. But uh, a player should also metagame that a little bit and trust their GM and go, okay, we'll do it. And yeah, also when it comes to like helping your game master on that one, a good player should come to their GM either in front of the whole group, between sessions. They could message them or talk to them, whatever, and let them know if there are any problems going on with the game. Like, are you having a problem with the schedule? Are you having a problem with another player? Are you having a problem with the game? Are you having a problem with me as the GM? Whatever it is, or is is there something that you want out of this game? Because I might not know. I might not know that you want to get the double-handed sword dancer thing, or you want something involving a character from your backstory. It then you're if you're kind of trusting that I'm going to figure that out, I'm a dumbass. So sometimes I just need somebody to go like, hey, you know what I would think would be great? If a player comes to their GM and says that, one, you just took a ton of burden off your GM's shoulders of them trying to figure out what in the hell it is you want. Uh, you're also more likely to get it because I will remember if they do come to me with something that they want, or if they come to me with a concern. I have had a lot of drama also happen in games where a player was frustrated with something, me or another player or whatever it is, and they never told me. It is kind of slowly built up over time, and finally they hit their breaking point, and I'm sitting there like this has come out of left field, and yeah, and even if it is something that I've done wrong, half the time I'm thinking like, man, you could have told me this weeks ago, and I had no idea. So yeah, that communication of any issues or any concerns or just desires is a great way of preventing that from ever becoming a an actual problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because players remember that, as we said earlier, you're not the only one at the table. Some of your other players, they may have already come to the GM and said, I'd really like to see an adventure that, utilizes my character's backstory or my character's family. I'd like that to be kind of some of the core mystery and root, and that will really give me agency and motivation to dive in deep into this. Your game master is, hate to burst your bubble, they are only human. And so they may have been inadvertently more focused on maybe one or two of the other players and their characters because they came to them already. And so they may have just overlooked, some of the needs that some of the other players might have. So if you have something that you want for your character, talk to your game master. He'll find a way to, blend them all together and go, oh, that's right. I did overlook that. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that to me. Let's work this in. Oh, you know what? This element from your backstory, what if we crossed it with this other character's backstory? And now all of this can be happening all at once. And that kind of helps, accelerate the dangers and heightens the excitement and the rewards that the players are going to be getting out of this campaign. But, definitely the players need to advocate for themselves, talk to the game master and say, "Hey, I'm kind of hoping that in this next campaign we can do this for my character. That's what I'm looking forward to as well."
Yeah.
I've had players who have told me that, Well, I have a buddy of mine who's playing in a Star Wars game that I'm not in anymore, but I'm kind of watching from the side. And this guy, his character was, a smuggler, a mechanic, and he had really advanced a lot in the tech trees that he was in. But he finally had this idea. He's like, I kind of also want to be force sensitive. And it wasn't until he brought that up to the game master who's running that Star Wars game that the game master was like, "Oh, I had no idea. Yeah, let's work on that." And so they're now like pushing hard, and he's like acquired a lightsaber, and he's like doing all this stuff. I'm like, that sounds amazing. I mean, they're just putting together this just awesome, epic Star Wars tale, and he's having a blast. You went from scoundrel and rogue to now he's a force sensitive scoundrel and rogue with a lightsaber that he put together.
And the other one is a lot of times, like, when you have your session zero, you'll talk about that. I actually refer to a lot of the stuff like a session zero is it session zero never ends. Uh, Sometimes, once again, I'm a dumbass and I sometimes forget stuff when I sleep. If we started this campaign several months ago, I might have forgotten something that was mentioned. So it's also good when you are talking to your GM, like, hey, just a reminder, because I can't tell you how many times I have forgotten little things that my players want or don't want. And so there's nothing wrong with mentioning that, especially before they become a problem and they have to be mentioned. So definitely communication. Communication's like 99% of the solution to just about any
Right.
problem in a game.
Just talking about it will almost always fix it.
But there's also etiquette. Once again, we're dealing with other people. I think one of the things with like playing in person that I don't know. I always do appreciate and will usually endear you to everyone in the room if you're a player is if you aren't hosting the game, if it's you're playing at someone's house or you're playing at a shop or wherever, um, if you can offer to assist if there's like any sort of group food or the group bowl of snacks or drinks or whatnot, um, that's always appreciated. I mean, we used to play with some of these guys when we were at college, and we were so broke. It was hilarious, but you know, but we also knew what it meant when so and so brought that bag of Doritos for everybody. Because we knew that we were broke. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be anything special, but it does some get noticed after a while. The one person that only eats the Doritos or drinks the Cokes and never offers to help, or when you leave the host's house and it's trashed because gamers were like locusts, man. Like we're a nightmare.
Descending on the crop.
Yeah, and so like when I've had a player who was like leaving and be like, "Hey, let me take the trash out," it's just like I I love you because they're already going out to their car or whatnot, and they just grab the trash bag and take it out with them. It's little things like that, or like, hey, let me help gather up plates and just move them into the kitchen so you can wash them later. So that little stuff of being a good party guest is really valuable, especially because sometimes the GM isn't the host, and you've got that one player who just happens to have the biggest table and the least roommates or whatnot.
Hmm.
Uh, and but then like after every game, like their place is completely decimated. They have no drinks left because somehow all the food in their fridge is gone. Uh, so being a good player at an in-person game is also being a good guest at a party.
I wholeheartedly agree. That's awesome for in-person gaming. I was thinking about, because I do a lot of online gaming, some of the etiquette, because it's all falls under the etiquette, is showing up on time. you know
Oh, well,
Um,
any game it's showing up on time.
any
And
game, it is definitely showing up on time. But with the online games, there's I don't know. It feels like um, some players will just be like, "Well, the game doesn't start until 8. I don't have to log on until then." And you know what? Depending upon what your circumstances are at home, maybe logging on right at 8 is the best that you can do. If you're ready to rock and roll right then, there's probably not going to be an issue with it. But I mean, you know, we're all human, so we want to kind of warm up and chit chat and say catch up. I
oh yeah.
mean, it may have been a week or two since you've been able to see these guys. Maybe you want to just say hi. So if you're if circumstances prevent you from logging on any earlier than that, then either, figure something out. Either, save the chit chat for after the game, or maybe, bring, this goes back to talking to your GM and talking to your players, your fellow players, and say, hey, you know what, this 8 o'clock is difficult for me. What about 8:15 or 8:30? And I'll still be able to maybe try and log in at around 8, but then that'll give me time to kind of warm up and check my equipment and get warmed up, before
Oh,
we actually start going.
oh yeah, because you've got that one who has to they get off work, they got to get home, maybe they got to pick their kid up. Yeah, they gotta they gotta do all this stuff. So when the game starts today, they are like rushing to sit and get all their stuff on. The other problem is they're actually not mentally in a condition to play, even if they're
Hmm.
physically there. So, and even though 7, 8 months ago, when we scheduled like, hey, we're gonna meet, every other Thursday at 7:30, and that was cool. Life happens, things change, and that's part of that ongoing communication, because that's when it can build up with like you are never on time, or whenever you're there, you're kind of not really there for like the first 20 minutes. Uh, just gonna be upfront, like, hey guys, uh, it changed. I also have kind of like my deal with my players, like, uh, people miss games, people are late. That's life. Uh, but let me know when you know that you're going to be late, because sometimes like I'll get a message the day before or an hour before of like, oh hey, you know the kids soccer game was going a long time, or whatever it is that's going on, and they just found out. Let me know. And sometimes we'll move the game back. Other times, if it's not gonna be that late, the rest of us will meet, and I'll just be like, hey, so and so's not going to be here for like half an hour. And then we just kind of BS for half an hour till they can get there.
Hmm.
And uh, and then when they get there, like, okay, let's start. Versus we all show up on time and we don't know where they are.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't know they're going to be late. And like they can't message you because they're like in their car flying, flying home, or flying to the game. But they can't message. Hey, that happens too. But a lot of the times there is enough warning that they have, and if they have that opportunity, they should just let everyone know, and that's cool.
Yep.
But online, there is the technology issue.
Oh yeah.
And
Technology, there's software updates, there's things there's software that gets stopping supported, right? I mean, there's just things can happen all the time. So as a good player, you're going to want to ensure, if you're in an online game, ensure that all of your equipment is working. If you've had to move your laptop and some of your equipment moved, ensure that everything is plugged back in right. Ensure that you've got everything installed, your software is installed and up and running, and that nothing changed in between.
like
Uh,
Discord and I, who are mortal enemies, Discord sometimes just decides to change at random which microphone and camera
Yep.
It is, and that has caused so many issues where it just for whatever reason decided that like, well, this is not your primary microphone, which is a microphone that I have disabled because I don't want it to work. It's trying to listen to a mic that doesn't work, and now everybody's looking at my lips waggle, and we spend 20 minutes silently tech supporting it before we can
Yes.
begin. I am uh, very impatient when it comes to that, so I usually end up being the one that once we finally get the game going, like I need like the next 15 minutes to like get my blood pressure down because
Hmm.
uh, of whatever it is. And really with online games, I do consider that if the game starts at X time, 15 minutes earlier is the time I need to be on just to make sure all my stuff's working. Because
Sure.
I hate it if I am the jerk who can't get their microphone to work, or I am the jerk who I can't hear anybody. And so that's part of the like if I show up early, I'm so happy if somebody else is there because then I can do the like, hey, can you hear me? And they're like, yes, can you hear me? And then they realize I can't, and then we can troubleshoot through that. And then when the next person hops on, we can both try to help troubleshoot them through it if they're having any problems. Because um, I very rarely have ever had an online game that did not have one person be the loser of broken equipment roulette. Of just
Yes. Yes. This was years ago. I was going to be a player in a fantasy game, and the game master just was adamant that we play on fantasy grounds, I think it's called. And all the players showed up, and the game master was showing up, and we showed up, or we were communicating. I think maybe it was through Discord or something at the time. I forget exactly, but the game master was like, "Okay, let me get Fantasy Grounds up and going." And I guess everything, all of his notes, everything about the adventure was in Fantasy Grounds. He didn't have any other digital copies, local or anything like that, and could not launch the product. Could not get it going. We spent over an hour just shooting the breeze, kicking it back as he was just swearing and just having a devil of a time trying to get this application to launch so that we could play. And after it was an hour plus, after that we were all like, you know what, I think we're just going to call it. And it was just a complete flop
oh
because he couldn't get that technology going. And I mean, it happens. I mean, sad to say, but the technology issues happen. So as a player, just do your best to try and not be that guy.
no, because yeah, we have had the whole gambit of wacky tech issues come up, and so I'm a big believer try to get your stuff checked before the start time because if everybody logs on at 8 and the game starts at 8, we're then going to spend the next 20 minutes trying to make sure that we can all see and hear each other. And
Yes.
because sometimes there's a thing where like, well, I can hear everybody but Dave. And then we're trying to figure out, well, is it on your end or is it on Dave's end? Yeah, it's just it's so horrible. So that is a big one. Also with online gaming, the big one is like we talked about with cell phones. The internet's right there.
Mm,
And uh, it is so tempting. Please, for the love of God, resist. Because when we had to move our group to online gaming when lockdowns and everything happened, that was the biggest hurdle because while all of my players knew not to just screw off on their phones and all that. They knew all the reasons why. The, playing with your phone requires the action of your reach over and you play with your phone. And everybody knows you're playing on your phone because you're doing that. But now they're just looking at their screen. They're kind of listening in. And then all of a sudden, like, we had started having like players all of a sudden like, well, what's going on and all that. It's like, dude, you're playing online, and it's clear that you are. And if they wear glasses, you can actually see it flicking in the reflection in
Right.
their lenses. That's why I can't get away with it. So,
Exactly.
but yeah, definitely do resist the urge to casually surf. Um, I don't mind if they need to. Yeah, sometimes we will check something, like quickly Google something, and that's it. But there's also the so and so's updating their social media, or they're scrolling through the
Uh,
news feed of whatever is going wrong in the world, and all of a sudden they are
yeah.
not engaged in the game anymore, and the rest of us have to struggle to keep them engaged, and that
You know
is
what?
a lot
You know what
harder
those
online.
guys can become? They could become problem players.
My God, they can.
See what I did there?
Yeah. Well, let's now flip this over, since we've talked about what to be good with a lot of weird rants about tech, of dealing with problem players, which I don't know, that's a pretty broad subject there.
It is. I guess I feel fortunate that I don't really feel like I have any war stories, problem player war stories. Um, there is one that I kind of suspect might become one, which is actually a tip that I have for, uh, you know, this is really kind of shifting into game master tips on dealing with problem players, but it's watch out for the signs when the players are creating characters. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with player tips on create a character who's going to be invested in the adventure that you're going to play. If your player is trying to propose a character concept that by design wouldn't gel with that adventure, wouldn't be motivated to investigate the horse, but still they want to make this character. And I've had a player recently tell me, he goes, I think it'd be a great source for chaos. That is a red flag. That is a problem player going, can I please come in and just destroy your sandbox?
Now, I don't need a player to make the source of chaos. That is clearly a player that has no idea how much chaos I'm already juggling, because players are inherently uh, that. And well, when it comes to most problem players, there's the solution is usually communication, such as when a player does come to you with a character concept that is completely inappropriate for what we're playing, such as if I say, "Look, we're going to do a game. We're going to play Call of Cthulhu, and all of you are students at Miskatonic University, and you are all the law department, and we're gonna go that." And then somebody says like, you know, "I want to be a Japanese ninja that doesn't speak English." Like, okay, where does that fit in to what we're talking about? And there's that communication of uh, the players need to know what the agenda, or like what the plan is, what we're trying to do, and then you kind of need to talk about it. If it doesn't work, maybe they can come up with a way to work. Maybe we can put our heads together, come up with it. But also, maybe they need to come up with a different character concept. And waiting until they show up with the character made at the beginning of the session is the wrong time to have that conversation. Uh, so that's, let's see, that's part of the session zero. But the you need to have that talk. Or if they are the one that is hogging the spotlight from the other players, kind of steamrolling over them. I've had some people that were great role players and everything, but nobody else got a word in edgewise. Uh, or I guess they enforced that it be my plan. I am the one that comes up with plans. You have to do my plan. And I'm sitting there as the GM going like, man, your plan is terrible. It's so and so also wants to have a plan. And I know that their plan's good, but it's all of a sudden this argument over which passage they should take in the dungeon or whatnot. Um, that is something that needs to be talked about. And sometimes that is
Yeah.
an uncomfortable conversation. And depending on the group, this is also problem players, since they can all be different, every group is a different dynamic. Sometimes those conversations need to be done as a group, other times they need to be done one on one. Sometimes they need to have a mediator of, but a conversation needs to happen. Uh, I have resisted doing that because nobody wants to have that uncomfortable talk of, hey, man, we're having problems in the game because you are not invested or you're kind of bullying or whatnot, or you're clearly playing online because we can all see the reflection in your glasses, whatnot. But that talk is necessary before it does boil up into something more. And it's like I talked about with a good player, we'll do that. The GM needs to bring that up. Or sometimes the players need to bring that up because the players are, it's hurting their good time too. And many times the problem player might not realize that it's a problem. And it's plain as day to everybody else, but they might not
Yeah.
realize they're causing an actual problem. And if they're mature adults, most of the time that's all it takes. It and then it's solved because it's like an oh my god, I'm sorry. Um, Other times it doesn't, but it does need to be just brought up to them because it could just be a misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's funny, as you're saying this, this is bringing up memories that I had completely forgotten about.
You've
Uh,
repressed them, sir.
Repressed memories. I, as a kid in high school, playing, I mean, we would run into these players, and this is what would drive me nuts is um, another player might be saying, "Hey, I have an idea on how we should approach this problem," and then he'll explain the idea. And without us ever even being able to implement that idea, the problem player overtalks him and this is all during the planning session and says, "No, that's dumb. You need to do this instead." And come on, and he just bullies the table into doing his plan,
Yeah.
and who knows if the other one would have worked or not. And we never, as kids, we never addressed it. I don't think we addressed it appropriately, because I know for myself,
Oh, we didn't.
eventually I would just leave.
Oh,
Even if it was a fun game, I would just like, it's not for me then, and I would just leave. And I'd hear later about how you know the bully finally got fed up because everyone hated his really bad and loud ideas, and then he would leave, on his own. But
well,
ugh,
so, but a lot of the issues, like you've got the murder hobo who just walks in and shoots the first NPC that gives them grief, or just it does disrupt stuff in character, bullies the players in and out of character, those sort of issues. Um, a lot of the times when you talk to them, you can also learn that what they're doing is a reaction to something else. And like they're bored. And that's when you find out that you as a GM are also not doing your job right. And they're responding, not in a good way, but they're responding. Like, murder hobos are very frequently the act of somebody who's bored because
mhm.
you're not moving the game along. And so I, I actually encourage you should always talk to them, even if you know. at the beginning of the conversation that you're booting them and there's no way out of it, you should still talk to them, kind of like an exit interview. Because a lot of times I've learned what I have done wrong, where I have failed my players because I was responding to the symptom of the problem, which was often a player became disruptive or became an issue, uh, when it was actually a good portion of me. So that's been, or there's just they don't want what your game is, so maybe we shouldn't just play. You know, they can be a great friend, they can be a cool person, but they're wanting to have a dungeon epic kill the bad guy sort of adventure, and you're wanting to have a slow burn mystery. Those aren't going to mesh with whatever it is you're serving. Talk about find out that's what the source of the problem is, and figure it out. But I've also had it where when I have uh, talked to my players after I've gotten rid of a problem player or a problem player has left, that I discovered that I had good players that were considering leaving.
Mm,
And so I was almost in a situation where my group got smaller and the player that I wanted is gone and the player that I don't want is still there. Because they're often the last one to get the clue that something's wrong.
right.
so, so all of
Right.
a sudden, it's the GM and this problem player staring at each other.
Yeah.
So, but definitely talk about it. See what it is, because there could be a lot of issues that the GM isn't aware of that that can be remedied. Whether it be uh, they're bored because the GM hasn't been doing enough, or they're reacting because so and so is actually being a jerk to them and nobody else notices how they're doing it, or they think that this is supposed to be an epic superhero game when it's not, or whatever it is. So definitely talk to them, but at the same time, uh, every single time I have ever gotten the point where I had to boot a carrot player, uh, the game has instantly improved. I've had players I've wrestled with it forever, of like, I don't want to do it, I shouldn't do it, and then you finally pull the trigger, and then the improvement is instant. Part of that is because I've had where if you're dealing with a problem player, part of my prep before the game is bracing myself for what I'm gonna have to deal
Oh,
with.
yeah. Yeah, you
Where
shouldn't put yourself in that
yeah,
situation.
I'm doing all my game prep. I'm getting my handouts ready. I'm trying to make sure I got all my NPC names straight. I'm trying to make sure that my plot actually holds water. Whatever it is, and then I prepare for Johnny, like brace myself for whatever shenanigans Johnny's going to throw at this. And I'm preemptively doing damage control in my head of like, okay, we can't do that because I know what Johnny will do. And Johnny will do the worst possible thing ever. So you're kind of trying to
Yeah, it will.
tailor your game to prevent these problems. And then once they're gone, all of a sudden it's like this like, oh wow, I hadn't realized how stressed I was working up to games. And then you talk to your players, and your players had the exact same thing where it's like, man, before the games, I'd be on the drive there, like building up my armor to deal with Johnny's crap. And then to come to a game and we don't have it, and no fear of it's just because you missed this session, we'll be back. It's like, it's all gone. Everybody was suddenly relieved. So every single time I've had to boot a player, I have ultimately benefited from it. Even if it was my own reaction to them, my preemptive dread was gone. I became a better GM because I can now focus all my brain power on giving him a good game rather than trying to stop, you know, Johnny from ruining everyone's time.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, speaking of focusing on the game, you know, GMs, if you are experiencing a bad player, absolutely you must resist, because I know it's there. You want to wield that power you hold and make it so that Johnny has a difficult time in the game as well. And honestly, all that will do is reinforce the shenanigans. It will make it so that Johnny just is emboldened to be a bigger jackass.
Oh yeah, if you have the lightning strike from the gods or whatever, if you're punishing the character as a means of disciplining the player, and the temptation is absolutely real. Uh, and one of the things I realized when I started actually like doing like podcasts and YouTubes and all that is I can't even make those jokes anymore because so many people think that's actual advice to do, even though it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna have a rock fall on him and kill him. Like just because the
Hmm.
temptation is so real, it never goes well. Uh, the momentary endorphin rush of doing it has does not ever equal either a acknowledging or solving the actual problem itself, but it has now made an adversarial um, thing because the GM has abused their power by punishing the character instead of the player. And let's say before you punish the player, it's good to talk to the player to find out why this is happening. But as tempting as it is, and it is sometimes horrifically tempting, don't punish the character. I still have to stop myself from like, is it so easy?
So
And
easy.
and when you are frustrated or angry with them, it's like I've got the power of the gods. I could just smite their character. Don't do it. It never ends well.
Nope.
Um, it just makes you look petty, and it sends the wrong signal. And it's also changing the subject from the important subject because now they're upset about what you did to their character, and we've kind of forgotten. Well, the reason all this happened is because Johnny's being a jerk. Um, it's completely changed the focus. So yes, you have to just resist the
Yeah,
horrible urge.
absolutely. It will if you do something like that, it will just justify in that player's eyes. It will justify their behavior, and don't do anything to for that justification. Just let it be.
No, and yeah, it's said I've even had to even cut out the jokes about it because I don't want to ever give the impression that that is something that's good. Uh, I think like like the original edition of D&D did have that as advice. It was terrible advice. I mean, RPGs are new. We hadn't figured it out yet, but
Right, right.
like like there was ethereal mummies. Recommend like if they're playing with your problems, just have an ethereal mummy show up and kick their ass. Like that was poor advice. So
That's funny. Yeah, not good advice. And some problem players will earmark them as problem players. Some of them they just might be simply misguided. They may not actually realize that their behaviors are being um, received as they are. Could just be um, bad delivery. I mean, some people are just terrible at making jokes. Some people are just terrible at blending in with what we might consider as social norms, and so they just might need a little bit of help in fine tuning um you know their humor or the way that they interact with others in the group. So you know
no,
this
and
goes back to conversation is key. Having open lines of communication will usually solve all these problems.
yeah, and look, I am an absolute king at uh, accidentally offending somebody or uh, dominating and not realizing that I'm dominating a conversation or talking over somebody. I'm really good at it. I'm also very receptive at the look from my wife, but sometimes they might not know that they're doing it. Their impression might be that, well, everybody loves it when I do that. It's like, no, Johnny, they don't. So I say, if you talk to most of the time, if you're dealing with a mature person, when we were when we were 14 and gaming, we were horrible little monsters. But if you're dealing with a mature person, um, they will, once they understand that it's causing problems, fix that behavior. And sometimes they don't. And if they don't, let them go. Because however much it might hurt to do it, I have 100% of the time stood by that decision after I saw the way it played out and realized how much better the game was.
This was good. This was really good.
Yeah, man, you dredged up a lot of old memories in me, though. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a hug tonight. So talk to my wife.
But no, I thought this was. I thought this was hopefully any players out there at least got some advice on how to be a good player, and also any GMs who have dealt with probably if you GM long enough, you're going to have a problem player. Uh,
Yeah.
if you haven't yet, you're lucky. Just give it time; it'll happen.
It will happen. I have successfully repressed all those memories, but
Evidently.
yeah, you're gonna bring it out of me, though. I'm sure. Well, we cannot do this show without the generous support of our patrons, and we have a few new patrons that we'd like to welcome. I want to say thank you to Jacob Robinson. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jacob. And also a huge thank you to Warren Hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Warren, and to Jack Rapasa. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, sir. And then Chaos Alpha, which I assume is a handle. Otherwise, that is an epically awesome name. Thank you very much.
I expect his middle name is Danger.
Oh, God, I
Chaos
hope
Danger
so.
Alpha.
I hope that is his real name or her real name. And I hope it's
Yes.
Danger.
And finally, a huge thank you to Guy Fortune. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you, Guy.
If you want to help the show and be a patron, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/modern_mythos.
Yes. Or if you want to support our channel, another way to do it is checking out our Redbubble store, where you can pick up a Modern Mythos shirt or mug or hat or sticker, and supporting the channel that way. Also, walking around with our wonderful John Sumrow art. Um,
So good.
so, the links down in the show notes if you would like to check out our Redbubble store.
And as I said, we can't do this show without our amazing editors, Max Mahafa and Edwin Nagy. Thank you guys for your hard work and keen skills in making us sound awesome.
Thank you, guys. You get to delete the long periods of silence where John and I stare at each other, completely clueless.
Lovingly stare at each other.
Oh, it's loving? Damn.
Like I said, I need that hug.
We also want to thank John Sumrow for our badass logo. He's a very talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook and check out his official website, and please consider joining his Patreon account as well. Once again, links down in the show notes.
And finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role playing game, then you really need to check out Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Check out their Bandcamp site and their official band site. We will have links in the show notes.
They're also terribly nice, by the way. Like,
Super nice.
super duper nice.
Super nice.
On a personal note, they're really great guys. But
Yeah.
anyways, check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.